Hey there guys, and welcome back to Tech Easily. So in today's video, this is the last one for connecting HTML to a database using PHP. Now, like always, all of my previous videos will be linked in the description box down below from the series. So please check them out first before watching this one so you guys actually understand what's going on. But for now, in today's video, this is probably the most important one out of all of them, and in today's video I will be teaching you guys all about PHP. So as always, I'll go through a slide, a presentation, and briefly explain to you guys the basic concepts of this language. And I'll teach you how to create a PHP file, on how to actually use it to access your database successfully, and then we will use it to add data into our MySQL database by submitting the form that we made in our previous videos. So this one is going to be a really interesting video, guys. So if you're interested, then please keep on watching. So let's go over some basics of PHP first. PHP is a server scripting language. It's an acronym for Hypertext Processor. It's also an open source language and it's free to use, and it's actually really commonly and widely used as well. So how can you distinguish if a file is PHP? It has a .php extension. A really interesting thing about a PHP file is that you can actually store HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code inside, as well as the PHP code itself. And this is really different to some of the previous ones that we used. For example, a CSS file, it can only include CSS code, or in a HTML file, if you want to include CSS code, you need to use the style element tag. But in PHP, you can just use all of these languages along with PHP as well. So that's really interesting. Another really important point is that PHP code is executed on the server and sent back to the browser as HTML. And I'll actually demonstrate this to you guys in a bit, and you'll understand it better, and I'll show you what it actually means. So the last point in our presentation, PHP can be used to add, modify, or delete inside data inside your database. And again, this is the basic reason that we're using PHP, is to connect our HTML form with our MySQL database and actually insert data into the database that we created in our previous videos, into the table, into that database. So now that we've gone over really briefly the basic points of PHP, we're actually going to get into PHP itself. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I need you guys to do is start the Samp server. So like always, we are going to start Apache and MySQL, and then click admin here to access PhpMyAdmin. So we're gonna wait for it to load up. Here we can see the database that we created in our last video, so it was known as my website. And inside here you can see the table that we created called sign up. And this is some data that I actually put in just to test, but I'll be showing you guys how to do that in a while. We click on the structure, you can see everything that we created in our last video, so the ID, name, age, email, password, and that's all going to be linked to our HTML form. Okay, so now that we have all of that into place, let's go ahead and create our PHP file. Okay, so now guys, I want you to go into where you installed XAMPP into your machines. So if you remember in our first video, we installed Samp. So it's this here, where we just started the Apache and MySQL. You want to locate where you have that installed. So in my computer, it's located on the C drive. I have Windows, but if you guys have a different operating system, then you want to locate to where that is installed in your machine. And inside Windows is XAMPP, and you want to go into this folder here. Now you want to look for a folder called htdocs, so I'm going to double click on this one. And this is where we're going to create our folder that's going to contain our PHP file and all the other files. I'll show you guys that in a second. So let's create a new folder here. I'm going to call this my website. You can call it anything you want. And inside of this folder is where all of our files are going to go. So really quickly guys, I'm going to copy my both files. So the form.html and also the CSS style sheet that we created in our previous videos. They should be coming up in the I button right now if you want to get access to the code behind these. But now you guys, there's a really important step that you need to take. So as you guys can see, and you know that the form is actually inside of a HTML file. But like I mentioned in my PowerPoint, a PHP file can include HTML code along with PHP. So this is what we need to do right now. I'm going to right click this HTML form file, click edit with Notepad, and as you can see the code is the same as what we created. And what I want to do is go into File, go into Save As, and what I'm going to do is say form.php instead of hypertext markup language. So instead of HTML, I'm going to save this as PHP. So if we look back in our folder, it has created a form.php, so we can just get rid of the form HTML one. So Control and D. And now we're left with a form.php. And that's going to make no difference to how our HTML is displayed, because it's actually sent back to the browser as HTML, like I mentioned in my PowerPoint. So let's go ahead and create the PHP file that's going to actually connect our form to our database. Now before I do that, I just want to really quickly show you guys. As we can see, the form action is actually sending this form. When it clicks on submit, it's going to go into a file called senddata.php. And I want to be really careful and make sure that you actually create a file, or you have a file already that does match this form action. So I'm just going to copy this and let's create a new file and save this into my C drive. So it's inside my C drive, inside a folder called Samp, in htdocs and in my website. And I'm going to save this as the form action name of that file, and then the extension of .php. So now some basic syntax of PHP. So the first thing is that a PHP script starts with a bracket, and you're going to put a question mark and type in PHP. Now this is the start. Like in HTML we have starting and ending tags. So for example, HTML, this would be our starting tag, and then the closing tag would be with a /. So that would be the closing tag. And for PHP, this is kind of similar. This is what you would say is your opening tag, and then to close this, it's just a question mark and an angled bracket. And any PHP code that we want to use is going to go in between these 2 points here. So the first thing we want to do is test for a connection to see if we can successfully connect to our database. Okay guys, so PHP can connect to a MySQL database using two things. The first thing is known as MySQL I, and the I stands for improved. So we can use this, or we can use another thing known as a PDO, and this stands for prepared data objects. So the one you choose, either it's MySQLi or PDO, that's totally up to you, and both do have advantages and disadvantages like everything else. But for today's video, I'm going to be using PDOs. So let's get started. Okay guys, so let's create a variable, and remember all your code has to go in between these. So if you're not new to programming and you've done this before, you probably do know how to create a variable. The only difference is that you need to put a $sign in front of your variable, and then you just say equals to, and because this is a string, I need to put in my quotation marks and then end it off with a semicolon. And this is pretty much similar to other programming languages if you've done any of them, but remember you do need a $sign in front. And we're making this to test out our connection between our database, if it's working or not. So in here you're going to put in localhost. Okay, so the next variable I'm going to create is the username, and again same as the first one, and I'm going to put root down as this one. The next variable is going to be password, and inside here is what you're going to put your password to access your MySQL server. And the last thing we're going to put is the database name, so you can say DB name or you can say database name, whatever you want to say. And as you guys know, that our database's name is my website. So I'm going to go back into my code and put in my website. Make sure you guys get the spellings right, and also that it is that database that you want to insert this data into. Now this is to check the connection, if we are actually connecting to the MySQL database using this PHP code. So this first part is very important, and this is basics of whatever type of forms you have or whatever you want to do. The first step is to always test out whether you're actually connecting to the database. And an important thing to note is the password, the username, and the database name. These can all vary depending on what you have put for yours, so please modify these according to what you have. So the next thing we want to do, you guys, is make a try and catch block. So our try statement, it allows you to define a block of code to be tested for errors while it's actually being executed. So I'm going to open my bracket and close them, and then along with it comes a catch statement. And this allows you to define a block of code to be executed, and if an error does occur, then in this case we can output that. So let's again open and close our brackets, and let's go into try here. So we have to think about this. What are we trying to do? So we're trying to make a connection to the MySQL database using all of these. So let's do that. I'm going to create a variable known as connection. Again, the names of your variables don't really make a difference. You can use anything. You can use con as shortcut instead of connection. It's totally up to you. And inside of here is where your prepared data object is going to go. So we started off by saying a new Okay, so inside of this PDO object, what do we actually pass inside it? So I'm going to open my brackets and put a semicolon. What we pass is the constructor, the data source name, the username, and the password. So I'm going to open up my quotation marks. I'm going to put in MySQL host here, and this is going to be equal to our server name, so localhost. I'm going to put that in here and put a semicolon. Now what you could do is actually just put in localhost down here, but the reason why we created that variable, or why we would want to create variables, is when you expand and you have a lot of code and just say one of these values changes, you don't need to go and modify it everywhere in your code. It's just takes up too much time. So if you have a variable, all you have to do is change your value in here, and it's good to go in everywhere else the code is. So it's always great practice to actually make variables instead of directly putting in your values here. So next we're going to put in the database name. So DB name goes in here. Again, you could do DB name is equal to my website down here, but like I said, it's always good practice to do here. Now the last two things I mentioned you have to pass through here is your username and your password. So let's just copy those, put Control C, Control V, and the same goes for password. Now that we have all of that in place, what we're trying to do is try to make this connection happen. And if it happens, then we want to actually know that yes, it has successfully connected. So what you can do is use a thing known as echo, and inside the quotations put in the message you want here, and this will be displayed onto your screen to tell you basically if it has connected. So if this is successful, I'm going to say connection successful. So we want to catch the error if it's not successful, so let's go ahead and put that in. So I'm going to say PDO exception and the $E or exception, and then we want to echo. So what we did before was connection successful, so I'm just going to copy that and say connection failed. And if you want to specify the type of error it is, you can use, in PHP you use a dot to connect, and we're going to say $E and then get message to actually get it. So this will basically get the real error code and message. So now that we have our try and catch blocks in place, we want to test for this connection. If it's successful, it's going to show you this string here, and if it's not successful, it's going to show you this. So to test this out, it's not as simple as we used to do in HTML. We just double click the file and it worked. Here you need to know that your folder that your code is in is my website, and inside of this, as you guys know, we have the form. We need to click submit on the form to actually access this page that we're working on, so the senddata.php, and that's when we submit that is when we can see if the connection is successful or not. So what I need you guys to do is go into your browser. You're going to go into your local host, and here you can see it's showing you the XAMPP sign as well. You're going to put in the name of your folder. So my folder was my website, which is in the htdocs in XAMPP, and inside of that I want to access the file called form.php. So you're going to put that in, and if you click enter, it should open the form up, and like I told you guys, it's displaying it in the same way as we did in the HTML file. So putting my code in a PHP file has made no difference to my HTML. But what you guys need to be really careful about is you get the folder name right, or else it's not going to work. And the same thing goes for your file name. So if you don't get these two correct, just look back over your folder name and your file names to get that correct, or else it will not work. Okay, so I've quickly filled in this form just to save time, and when we press submit, it should either show us that it has connected successfully, so this should be shown, or it should tell us that the connection has failed. So let's test this out, and as you can see, the connection is successful. So what this is telling me is that my PHP code has successfully connected to this database, to this MySQL server. So now we can get to the fun part, which is going to be adding data into our website database into the sign up table. So in here, this is just some test one I created. You can get rid of those. But now let's get into adding it. And guys, I would highly suggest you to actually check that the connection is working before you go on and put in lots of code for adding data. And this is because if you're new especially and you have a lot of code, it will be really hard for you to understand which part of the code is failing, or if your first step wasn't even correct and you're going on and putting on lots and lots of data. It can get really confusing, so it's good to know from the start, okay, this part is working and let's work on from here. So let's create our variables. So the first one that we have, we can go back into our form, is actually our name. So let's create a new variable. I'm going to say name, and it's going to be equal to, so we're going to say $_post, open up your rectangle brackets, square, and inside here is where you're going to put the name. So the first one we had was actually name, so I'm going to copy this across and put it inside here. And now since the HTTP method that we're using is post, that is why we have this here. If it was get, you would put get in here. I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to do the same thing for all of the variables that I have. So the next one we have is age. So just copy that over and put the variable name as age, pass age through from the form into our PHP file. Next one is email, and I'll just double check if that's what I have there in a second. Yep, we have email. And now the last one we have is password, and this is where I want to show you guys something. I'm just going to copy this and paste, change this to password. And now here, since what we have for our name is pwd, you guys want to be careful and you want to pass this through the post method. Now you can change the variable name to whatever you want, but what goes inside of here should match this. So if I had password like this down here, that's what I would pass. So just make sure that you guys do that, or else it's not going to insert the data into your database. So now that we have all our variables ready, we can go on and create our statement, and we're going to use the SQL insert statement. We're going to use the prepared statement to do that and then execute it, and then that should be us done. Okay guys, so let's create a variable, and I'm going to call this statement. You can call it again whatever you like, and inside of here I'm going to say $con or connection, whatever you guys chose, and then we're going to prepare this. And inside of here is where my insert SQL statement is going to go. Now if you guys are familiar with SQL statements, you will know that you can use insert, update, delete, etc. And to add data we will be using insert. And it goes something like insert into the table name. So in our case it's going to be sign up, and then the values we're going to pass through from the form. And then the reason why we're using a prepared statement is because it sanitizes your input. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open up my insert statement. So insert into the table name, and if your table name is not sign up, you can change this according to whatever table you have. So like I showed you guys, mine is sign up. So insert into sign up. I'm gonna open and close my brackets. I'll move this down so it's easier for you guys to see. And here I'm going to have the column names I have. So name, age, email, and password. So literally just separated by commas. Name, age, email, and your password. Notice the last column name, you don't need to put a comma after that. So what do we want to put into these columns? We want to put in the values. So I'm going to say values. Again, I'm going to open up a new set of brackets. And we want to bind these variables together. So what you're going to do is use a colon, name, and then do the same thing for each one of them. So age, then your email, and lastly your password. And I find this this way of doing it better because we don't need to use quotes. Some people do that and you have to escape them and do all those sort of things, and this is just easier way of binding the variables together. So I always do it this way, but it's up to you guys if you prefer a different way. Okay, so that is basically our statement done. I'm just going to Control S to save my work. Okay, so that, you guys, is the bulk of your work done. I would say the hardest part is over. So now the only thing that's left to do is actually make an execute statement to execute all the code that we have so far. So we know that it's getting connected. We've actually created our SQL statement to insert into this table all of these values into those columns. So the name would correspond to the name column, age to the age, etc. So why we want to use the execute function is to pass in the associative array of the variables that are defined in the SQL statement. So very simply, we're going to say statement execute. This is like we use the prepare one. So it's in a similar way. And if you have a different name for your statement, make sure you copy that one down. We are going to open our brackets, close this off with our semicolon, and inside here again, square brackets. And I'm just separating this so you guys can see better. And inside here, in quotes, I'm going to put in, so the name we have here, I want to bind that to the name that's passed through our form using the post method. So this is I think this is a very simple way of doing it. The same thing goes for the next thing we have is age, and I want to bind that to whatever age is passed through our form. And again, the same thing goes for email. Copy this over, again, whatever is passed through the form. There are a lot of other things you can do to your form fields. For example, set them as required, or set the max length and stuff, but for today's video, let's just concentrate on this. You can also check if the email has been used before, and if it has, then the user can't create it. We can do that using PHP code too. But for today's video, I'm not going to show you guys how to do that. You can also check if it's in the correct format. So if there's an @ if there's a dot, and also for password as well. Using PHP code, you can check if there's capital letters, if it has special characters, if it's uppercase, lowercase, if it has a certain amount of numbers in it. Again, there's a lot you can do, but just for the basics, let's just insert this data into our database. So that, you guys, I believe is all the PHP code we need to insert our data. So now let's go ahead and test all of this out. Okay, so if we go back into our browser, into our form.php, I'm quickly going to fill this form out and then come back to you guys. Okay, so I've quickly just filled in the form and I'm going to click on submit. Again, we haven't really specified if you want to message to say it's successful, but let's go into our database, let's refresh it and see if it actually worked. So like I showed you guys, I put in Emma, age 22, email and password, so all of my values are being passed through my form. The connection is successful. I just tidied up how the code was looking. So the connection is successful and it successfully entered all of my data into my database. So this, you guys, brings together the whole series. So we started off by XAMPP, we created our forms, we created the database, in MySQL, the tables, and then lastly used PHP to connect the HTML form to a MySQL database. So hopefully you guys know how to do that now. You can also do things like update your data using PHP. You can delete your data, you can create a table, you can create a database. There's a lot of things you guys can do using PHP, and if you guys are interested in finding out how to do that, then please let me know. I'll make separate videos for that. But for today's video, we have successfully learned to add data into our database. So that's it for today's video, you guys. And this video marks the end of connecting a HTML form to a MySQL database using PHP. Now, there was a lot of information covered in this series, and I really hope that you guys followed along without having any problems, and I really hope that it helped you guys in some sort of way. So until we code again, thank you so much for watching. Please leave any suggestions or questions you guys may have in the comments below, and I will get to them as quick as I can. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also give this video a big thumbs up, and I will see you all in my next video.